We actually have another Fireside Chat coming up next. It is Nicolas. I promised him I wouldn't try to do his last name, who's the CEO of Algolia, joining us on stage right now. So Nicolas, welcome to Empower. Good to have you here. Please, have a seat. So,
good. Hey,
it's good to have you here. Thanks for coming and making the time.
This thing.
Let's start off with, I guess, like the big question, like the story of Algolia, how you guys got started, because it's we were talking in the back, and it's actually fascinating.
Indeed. So we're about 5 years old today, and we started actually.
I think your mic is your mic on?
I don't know. Is mic on? Can you hear me?
No.
Get me. Oh, it's actually turned off in my. Okay, sorry about that.
Yes.
All right, so starting again. Yeah, we are about 5 years old today, and actually when we started with a different product. So today, if you don't know us yet, we are a search API. So you probably chatted a lot about API today, but we would help websites, apps, really to deliver a great search experience, like people like Medium or Twitch are using us. But when we started 5 years ago, we actually started with a very different product. Search, yes, but on mobile. So our idea was to develop an SDK that developers could use directly in their apps on mobile locally on the device. It was not possible yet. We saw a lot of unanswered questions from developers, app developers on Stack Overflow, for example. And we thought we had big market there, interesting market, we had the experience to do that. It didn't turn out that well. The market was not there, and so we decided to pivot to what we are today, which is a search API as a service, which means we pivoted from local to the device to a SaaS-based service.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting about that is that if you had started off there, you probably wouldn't have had the company you had now. So you had to go through that pivot.
That's right. Had we started SaaS, then we would have probably used open source Elasticsearch directly. We would have done better. The thing is that the constraints we had on mobile forced us to really develop something different, to kind of reinvent search for these constraints. And when we switched to mobile, when we pivoted, this mobile experience became our differentiation. We realized that what we had done on mobile was such a perfect fit for most of the user-facing use cases, consumer-grade search all over the web. And that's probably one of the main reasons of our success today.
Excellent. And pivots can be hard. One of the things we talked about is, how was the culture of the company able to successfully guide you through that pivot?
So at that time, it was still the two of us. So we are close to 150 today. We were still two people at that time. So I wouldn't say that at that time yet, that culture was overwhelming, had a big impact. But it was already we already knew what we wanted to build in terms of culture. We had that notion of ownership. So really the idea for us was to be the company where everyone would be owners, kind of like empowered to make decisions at their level, so that these kind of pivot or these kind of key questions, they could address them every day. And I'm very happy to dive in how deep that.
Let's go a little bit into that. So you had this culture of ownership. Mm-hmm. You've also had, what are the other parts of that culture, other tenets that you have, the key values in the company?
So today, of course, the culture evolved a lot along the years. We formalized it, and today, what we have built is a set of 5 core values that define who we are. And on the other side, we have the way we work. The way we work should change every single day. As the company scales, who we are should not change much. And so the way we define that are 5 core values that really are sustaining that ownership culture, that are grit, so grit, really perseverance, really trying things, getting out of your comfort zone, and if you fail, that's okay, you learn from it, you step up again. Trust, if you want to empower people to make their decisions, you need to trust them with as much data as you can. At Algolia, pretty much everything is transparent. Everyone knows how much cash we have in bank. I share my investors update with the team. Even the compensations of the team are transparent. Everyone in the company knows how much I make. Care is our third value. Could be on many roles. The idea here is really we want people to care about customers, but also like about each other's. One of the things I'm the proudest of, actually, is to see sales and engineers working together, which is pretty rare as companies scale. Maybe a quick anecdote on this one. We are soon going to change office in Paris. We have like close to 90 people there. We are going to move to a much bigger office with several floors. The obvious way to do that was to put sales and engineering on 2 separate floors. We decided especially not to do that, because that would have been creating cultural debt. In 1 year, they would not speak to each other anymore. So that's really kind of very important in who we are. The fourth value is probably the most unusual. It's candor. We try to be really candid with each other because we care. So if you want to help people really grow professionally, personally, you need to provide feedback to them. That's the only way they are going to learn. And we do that because we care. So the idea is, of course, to be very nice in your feedback, but not to hold it back. And the last one is humility. That goes also with candor. You cannot be candid if you are not, if you don't know, your feedback can be wrong. But that goes also with our audience. We speak to developers all day long. Very aggressive marketing, for example, doesn't work. Being very direct and honest and humble about what you do, what you don't do, is what's really appreciated, what generates trust. So that's really who we are.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then, you've codified like the sense of ownership with these 5 key values.
That's right.
How is that reflected in the product?
I think that, so the product is something much larger than purely the culture, but the culture is helping, of course, make better decisions. I'm trying to find an example here. One of the outcome of that culture is to have bottom-up kind of new ideas. Like the team can come up with ideas and speak up. I mean, we expect them to speak up when they have things to say or things to suggest. And one of these things that happened a couple of years ago was one of our PHP developer came to us and said, hey, there is this new awesome framework called Laravel that is very trendy in the PHP world. We should do an integration. Sure, go for it. I mean, don't even have to ask. He did it. He did also implemented a search of their documentation, did a pull request. They were super happy, accepted it. And that became one of the biggest lead generator we have because that created a very strong partnership with them. More than that, we derived a product out of that because we saw that this documentation search was so useful for them. We created what we called Dog Search, where we power the search of many developer frameworks, like React, Stripe, so many projects. I think it were 350 projects now. All of that came from that first initiative, from one team member. So it's really getting them to help us.
So enabling one developer to have that ownership, to make that decision, had all these downstream effects that you never even imagined.
Exactly.
Oh, that's fascinating. And then, there are obviously other parts of the organization more than just development. There's customer service, there's, obviously you have a sales team now, there's other parts of that. How else does ownership influence the way that you've intentionally built this company, more than just making sure people aren't on segregated floors?
Yeah, so one of the key things here is that from the beginning, we wanted to have everyone customer facing, speaking with our customers, with our users. And one of the way that impacted the company was actually customer support. we don't have any support team. The key thing here is that developers hate to speak to support people because they think they know better. What we did here is that all support requests are handled by the tech team, by our developers. It's kind of like a win-win situation because for customers, they love it. They love to have access to the people who develop the product. And for us, that's so important that our developers get to speak to customers, to see their pain, to see their needs, but also to feel the satisfaction of solving them. And it's a very good incentive to build a better product, to build a better documentation so they don't have so much support to do. It's kind of like a very good incentive, and that really helped shape the company as a whole, and not only, it was not only a small part like support. Actually, that's one of the implication. When I was speaking about sales and engineers working together, it's kind of one of these other impacts of that culture.
Yeah, and so, the engineers do support, and so obviously you're building new features. So how do you balance having the same engineering team do both? Do you rotate? Is it everyone does everything?
It evolved a lot in time because in the very beginning, every single person in the company was supposed to do support. So today we kind of scaled that differently to make it efficient. So what happens today is that they would rotate. They have some slots where they are covering support. And then the last thing we did was to actually have someone dispatching. So what happened is that as we were scaling, the product was getting bigger, more and more features. So not all developers were able to answer all questions. So the people that are kind of on duty are going to answer all questions they can and simply redirect the more expert questions to the team. And even if you are not on support, you are going to handle these questions. And that's kind of a priority. It comes from the care. You want to make sure the users are going to have the best experience ever because that's so important. It's kind of like a business where word of mouth, referrals are so key to your success. You want to make sure your customers are super happy. I don't know if some of you have an NPS score, Net Promoter Scores. That's something we follow very closely, making sure that our broader community is really supportive and has a great experience with us. Yeah.
And so just to do one last question on that is, if you're not on the rotation and you get dispatched a question, do you interrupt, the new feature building to solve that first? Is that with that core value of care, or is it handled a little different?
Yeah, it's not, except if it's urgent, but then you're going to be pinged anywhere, on Slack or anything, something's going to happen. You're going to be woken up. No, you are not expected to answer right away, but let's say hours, day maximum kind of time frame. Then you are expected to answer. But these questions are not going to one individual developer. They are usually going to a team. So in that team, usually there is someone that's going to be available to answer. If it's questions on a specific language, I was speaking about PHP before, for example. So if you have a customer that is implementing in PHP and has a complex question related to the language, it's going to be dispatched to a team that is expert in PHP, and that's going to be four people today. It's not a one person.
Wonderful. So we already mentioned you have a Paris office with 90 people. You have an office here in San Francisco, also Atlanta, New York. Anywhere else?
Not yet.
Not yet. Where else are you going?
Next is going to be London, and we're thinking about opening an office in Australia in the coming months. Months is not this month.
Not this month. Yeah, sure. And then how do you do that? How do you open a new office? How do you make sure everyone is connected and up to date? Because remote is hard. Remote offices are a little better, but it's still difficult. How do you handle that communication? How do you make sure that the offices don't drift apart from each other?
It's tough. Yeah. It's difficult. It's challenging. Now, if I go back a bit in time, actually the challenge started when we opened the San Francisco office. So we're headquartered in San Francisco, but maybe my accent tells. We started in France. when that happened, we were a bit lucky in a way because we participated to Y Combinator. After the batch of YC, we all went back to France, but most of our customers were here in the US and especially in the Bay Area. So we had to travel back and forth a lot. Traveling back and forth is a very good way to progressively learn the challenges of working at a very different time zone. When I was spending maybe a third of my time here, and when I was here, it was so difficult to communicate, and it was so painful to not know what was happening there. And that kind of created a muscle, like we got used to over-communicate, to prefer async messages, written messages, instead of just speaking together in the office. Many things like that we build up over time. And when we actually opened the office here, we were ready, kind of ready, much more ready. The other thing that was key there was the language. So in Paris, very early on, we chose to only speak English. Very difficult at the beginning, but so critical to be able to attract foreign talents. And so I think we have 17 nationalities now in Paris.
Wow.
We have really team members from all over Europe, including we have one from Israel, we have a few from the US. It became a very, one here, it became a big advantage for us to attract talents because we are not looking at the French market, we are looking at the European kind of talent market for Paris. And of course, speaking only English is so important so that the team in the US is kind of very well connected. From there, opening New York, opening Atlanta was not a big deal because we were so used to work at the distance that it was not such a big deal. We are discovering new challenges with these offices nonetheless because they are smaller. They don't, some of them don't have, in New York, we don't have long tenured employees. So it's creating new challenges that we're addressing as we go. But our history of having been split for so long kind of make us more ready to tackle these challenges.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you open these offices and you hire more people, do you train them on your culture, or are you trying to see if they fit into the culture, during the interview?
Both. The first thing is the interview process. Culture is a big part of the interview process. We're a bit crazy on the process. No, it's a pretty heavy process with calls to filter at the beginning. Then we got calls with the team, assignment. Then we have people coming on site, either in San Francisco or Paris. Sometimes both. We would fly people to our office, and then ref calls and all of that. Especially during the on-site, actually most of the on-site is about culture. We even have evolved a bit, and now interviewers often have a key culture value to test for. We built a set of questions to get inspired, as guidelines, ideas of how to test cultural values. But that's something we follow very closely, so that we make sure, and we can be wrong, we can fail, but make sure that at least get confident that the people are going to be a good culture fit. And once they join, I think the most important is really how the rest of the team is going to show by doing, by example. When I try to think with employees, after a few weeks when they have joined, one of the questions I ask is was there any surprise, good or bad? And a very common answer is that what was surprising is that the company was the way you described it would be.
Oh, huh. You're honest and able to do
and
that,
and that comes from the culture and from people showing care, showing trust and all the values.
Yeah. So care, trust, are values that are relatively universal.
Mm-hmm.
Candor is a little bit different.
That's the most difficult one.
Candor is a little bit more difficult, and especially there are cultural implications, about candor. And as you think about an Australian office or maybe an Asian office or an African office, some of those values may not translate as easily. How are you approaching that problem as you look to, take over the world?
one step at a time. One, maybe to start with, I would recommend all of you to read that book, Radical Candor. Super easy to find. Like, it's super good and kind of like explicit. Like, it's super clear exactly what we mean by candor. It's exactly what's there. It's stuff already here, already in Paris. That's super difficult. Actually, as we speak, as we scale, we realize that that's one of the most difficult values to scale. Because you can show by example a little, but that goes so far. So we're thinking about implementing trainings, how to give feedback and so on. And that's something we are starting to explore. If we look at like very different cultures, it's even more difficult. So I don't think Australia is going to be such a problem, but if we want to open an office in Japan next, the local culture is, yeah, I've lived there for some time. Being candid is definitely not in the local culture. I don't know yet the answer. We are going to try to maintain these values and probably adapt and find the right balance with the local people. I don't know what it's going to be like, but we are definitely going to try and not settle on that. So we need to think in a couple of years and see how it went.
Yeah, we'll have you back in a couple of years, and I'll ask you that question then. Let's take the chance now to open it up to the audience for some questions. See one up here.
So it sounds like your culture has enabled some pretty unconventional ways of operation within your company, like sales talking to engineering. Also, the fact that your engineers are doing support. I'm really curious about the latter. How did you? What was that evolution of kind of saying, did you just come to your engineers and say you're doing support now? How did you get buy-in? How did you get them to care about it, or did they care about it because of your culture?
I think the latter. So what happened is we didn't come one day to engineers and said, oh, now you're doing support. We started this way. Actually, we started, we were going much further when we started. When we started, it was every single person in the company was expected to support. And then we actually reduced that scope because quickly, as we were growing, it was like communication was becoming more difficult. If a salesperson, for example, was having to answer a technical question, quickly didn't make sense anymore. And so we started to reduce the scope of the number of people who would answer support questions to engineers, especially for tech questions. Like pricing, business questions are routed directly to sales. And so it's always been the case. It's always been transparent, so candidates know that when they join, they are going to meet engineers of the team and they are going to discuss that. So I think that's never been a surprise, never had to adapt to new things. Part of the expectations, it's like English. Going back to that, that's super funny because in the beginning that was difficult, but then we started to apply that so consistently that French candidates, they all do every single interview in English, including with French employees. So when they join, it's kind of expected for them. They expect to speak only English. So it's never a question. Same thing for support.
There's a question here in the middle.
Hi. It seems that you guys today have three main use cases with Algolia, that is SaaS, media, and e-commerce, right? Wonder if you can describe how was your process of discovering these particular use cases, because at the beginning you may have a diverse set because of being so horizontal, right?
Yes, the product is horizontal. It can really work, not everywhere, but like in any consumer-grade kind of search, when you have a user interacting with a service. These segments, like these industries, came progressively. When we started, we were everywhere. E-commerce kind of became obvious very early on because, if you speak about search on the web, that's kind of like the default example you are going to have in mind. It was also a good start for us because it's very easy to prove the value. Going to do an A/B test, and just if you win the A/B test, it's super easy to prove the value of the product. The next one was media, and kind of discovered from our customer base. We started to see more and more media using us, especially in the video space. Like we had like Vivo using us, then Periscope using us, and we started to realize there was like kind of like a very good fit for that category, and so we started to invest more in some features, but also kind of like messaging around media. And SaaS is the last one who actually came, and what's interesting with SaaS, it's a very different kind of use case. E-commerce media, it's public data, so you don't have any privacy concerns or anything like that. SaaS, I mean, the companies, they have to trust us with the data their customers trust them with. So it's kind of a much bigger bet for them. And so that's why in the beginning we didn't see that, but progressively we saw startups using us for SaaS products. And we were scaling with them. So, because if they were successful, their need of search, we are going to scale too, which was awesome. And rapidly we realized that our fastest growing set of customers were SaaS players. It was not the biggest overall, but in terms of upsell, upgrade, that was the fastest growing. And so we started to concentrate that there, starting to look at what were their needs, like compliance things, like SOC 2, like well, all the certifications. We all have to go. I guess
we had a talk on SOC 2 earlier this morning, yeah.
You know about that. But also, like as we speak, for example, right now, we're developing a new, let's call that a feature, but something in the product dedicated to this segment. Like their needs, like the biggest pain in SaaS is basically scaling. Mm-hmm. If you are scaling fast, at some point you are not going to be able to use only one server, then you are going to have like tens of servers and hundreds of servers, and like your user base is going to grow, you are going to have like customers everywhere on over the world, then you also have the privacy issue, you need to host the data differently, all of that stuff. And so that's exactly the next challenge we are going to address with our product for these players. So progressively it came like that. Well, like what is the next one? Kind of like what I'm seeking now, looking at our data, who are our customers today. Okay, what is our next segment where we can maybe invest a bit more, look at their need. Yeah, a couple of ideas there, but a bit early to say.
Are you ready for GDPR?
We are going to be ready for GDPR.
We all are, right? We will be there by like May 2018.
No, that's the biggest, like if you are, I mean, any company, not only SaaS, GDPR is like kind of a pain, like, but we have to do it. No, we will be ready. It's actually a bit more complex than SOC 2, for example. SOC 2 is stuff, but it's just process. GDPR involves engineering time, just to make sure everything is proper.
Do you think you have an advantage there just because you have that French base?
Yeah, that's a big advantage. GDPR, of course, but also like all the psychological aspect. We have, so it's not French or not, it's really like data centers. Where are we going to host the data? Today we have, I don't know, like maybe 1,100 servers in 50 data centers around the world. Wow. So one of the biggest advantage here is that if we have a customer in Germany, I mean, they are like that's kind of like the market where they are super confused about where the data is hosted. Yes, we have servers in Germany, no problem, you can host your data there. And even if it's not part of any specific regulation, just for the psychology impact, that's super useful. And of course, in terms of product and reliability and like multi-data center setup, multi-region setup, all of that, of course, that's part of the product we offer.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I have one last question I'd love to ask you about is, you know, as you've scaled, is it harder to scale the product across the 100 data centers? Or is it harder to scale the culture across all of your offices?
The culture.
Why? Because 100 data centers, I mean, that's nuts, right?
It's like a bit more than 50 data centers.
50 data centers.
Yeah,
okay.
but like more than 11 or 1,200 servers. We have actually a very small infra team. It's not big. We only have like 4 people on duty, on call. Mm-hmm. Like the nice thing here is that because there is only 4, if something happens, you are going to be woken up. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very, very good incentive to make sure, I mean, you don't want to be woken up. And so you basically, like, from day one, we've invested so much into building automatization everywhere. Also, we use, like if once today in our current infra, if one server dies, nobody is woken up. There is enough redundancy that could happen any day. That happens too often to have someone to have to wake up and correct that. So you deal with that the next day. And that's because that team was able to build all that automatization, and they are building more and more and more to make like deploying new servers like kind of like near instant and so on. So it was progressive, it was growing as the number of customers was growing, so that was finally not, it was super challenging, don't get me wrong, but it's something we're confident about. Culture, as you onboard, I mean, the culture has to evolve. We have these core values, but I mean, you cannot have the same, especially the way you work. You cannot work the same way when you are 10, 50, 150. Like you are going to see new challenges. Maybe to give you a very quick example, there was like several stages in the culture. There is one time when we were maybe 30, 35, where kind of the culture failed a little. The culture was already super important for everyone, so everyone was speaking about the culture. But then you would ask people, oh, why don't we do that? Oh, no, we cannot do that. Why? Because of the culture. Why? You started to realize that everything was mixed up in their mind. We were 30, so we were still flat, completely flat, no middle management. So many people started to consider, oh, that's our culture, to be flat. We're not going to scale to 1,000 people by staying flat. So that's when we actually did that work, that really work of formalizing these 5 key values and separating the way we work from who we are. And that was successful. But I'm sure that next month, next year, we are going to have new challenges. And yeah, and that's not frightening, but that's a bigger, in my mind, at least in my position, that's bigger challenges than the infra.
Are you excited?
I am, definitely.
Awesome. Well, Nicolas, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
I
you,
really
Sachin.
appreciate it. Thank
Thank you
so much.